The buzzards had already begun to circle when Elias Cutter spotted the blood. It streaked along the side of the barn, dark against the sunlit wood, still wet enough to catch the dying light. The air smelled of dust, horse sweat, and something coppery underneath, a scent Elias hadn't smelled since the war. He stood there for a moment, eyes narrowed against the gold-orange glare of evening, and felt the old stillness return to him, the kind that settled in when you didn't know what waited around the corner, only that you had to face it. He slid the rifle from his saddle and stepped quietly toward the barn, boots crunching in the dry gravel. No sound from the livestock, just the wind pushing through the sagebrush and the faint creak of the weather vane turning slow atop the roof. The blood trail curved around the side, smeared like a man had been crawling. Elias tightened his grip and followed it. That's when he saw the body, or what he thought was one. A man lay slumped against the barn wall, half shadowed by the overhang, one leg stretched out, the other drawn up under him. His coat was soaked through with blood, mostly around the ribs, and his right hand gripped a revolver that sagged toward the dirt. The fingers were twitching, barely. Elias raised his rifle. "Don't," the man rasped. The voice was raw, like it had been scraped over stone. "Don't shoot. That depends," Elias said, not lowering the barrel. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. His head lolled against the wall, eyes glassy with pain. He was young, maybe 30, hard to tell under the grime and dried blood. Not dressed like a drifter, though. His boots were worn but good quality, and his gun belt didn't sag with neglect. There was something careful about the way he carried himself, even half dead. Too careful. "I'm not here to rob you," the man said. "Just needed water." Place looked empty from the ridge. "You picked wrong." Elias looked past him. The blood trail ran back across the paddock, toward the ridgeline, where the sun was cutting low across the hills, painting the sky in molten streaks. If someone had been chasing this man, they'd be close. "What's your name?" The man hesitated. "Levi," he said finally. "Levi Brandt." Elias flinched, just slightly. The name stirred something he couldn't place, but the sun was going fast, and there wasn't time to weigh it. "Gun out," Elias said. "Nice and easy." Levi let the revolver fall. It thudded dully against the ground. Elias kept the rifle trained a moment longer, then stepped closer, crouched, and turned the man's coat aside. The bullet wound was bad, right side, below the ribs. Not fresh, not clean. Blood caked the shirt beneath. No exit wound. "You'll bleed out by midnight if I leave you here." "I know. Someone after you?" Levi nodded. "A posse. 4 men, riding hard. Maybe more now. Marshall? Something like that." Elias stood. The name, the wound, the story. It stank like a rotting fence post. But he'd seen death too many times not to recognize the way Levi looked at it. Not scared, not begging, just worn down. A man who'd run too far and didn't expect to run again. He cursed under his breath, slung the rifle on his shoulder, and reached down. "Come on. Can't let the buzzards win that easy." Levi didn't argue, didn't smile either, just gritted his teeth and let Elias haul him up, arm across the rancher's shoulders. The weight nearly brought Elias down. He hadn't hauled another man's weight like that in years. But they made it to the back porch, slow and gasping. Inside the house, Elias kicked the door shut and eased Levi down onto the cot in the side room, where the light was thin and the air smelled of old cedar. The wounded man grunted once and bit down hard on his sleeve. Elias found clean cloth, a basin, the whiskey bottle, and the little tin box of sewing needles. No time for finesse. He cut the shirt away and poured whiskey straight into the wound. Levi hissed. "Christ. That's not who you're talking to," Elias muttered. "Hold still." He worked fast. The bullet was lodged, shallow enough to dig out with the tip of his knife, deep enough to hurt like hell. Levi didn't scream, just clamped his jaw and stared at the ceiling with eyes that looked too old for his face. When it was done, Elias bandaged the side tight and left the man breathing like he'd run 20 miles uphill. He washed his hands in the basin and studied him. "You're lucky you didn't tear the liver. Might live if you lie still. Might not be up to me. Depends who's chasing you." Levi's eyes met his. "You don't want to know. I didn't ask what I want." Silence settled between them. Outside, the cicadas had started their dry sky song. Far off, an owl hooted once. Elias walked to the door and leaned against the frame, looking out at the twilight sinking fast into dusk. The wind had shifted, colder now, sliding down off the hills, and with it, something else. Distant thunder. No, not thunder. Hoofbeats. Elias turned back to Levi. "How many did you say?" Levi didn't answer, but the answer was already coming. Through the dusk, 5 riders crested the hill, silhouetted against the last of the sun like specters, moving slow but deliberate. Not a scouting party, a hunt, and they were headed straight for his ranch. Elias Cutter stepped off the porch and walked into the fading light, rifle across his back, heart heavy with the weight of choices long buried. He didn't know who Levi Brandt really was, but he knew this much already. He'd just made himself part of whatever storm was coming. The lead rider didn't speak at first. He sat tall in the saddle, long coat brushing the stirrups, silver badge glinting dully on his chest, like a tarnished star. The kind of man whose stillness was louder than most men's shouting. Elias Cutter had seen that kind before, back during the war, when orders were handed out with smiles and death rode in on clean uniforms. He stepped down off the porch, slow, hands empty, body loose, but ready. The rifle stayed slung across his shoulder, not out of trust, but strategy. "Evenin'," Elias said, voice calm but flat. "You're a long way off the main trail." The man with the badge tilted his head, studying the ranch house behind Elias. His horse snorted once, dust rising from the dry earth beneath its hooves. "You Elias Cutter?" he asked, voice thick with frontier gravel. "Depends who's asking." The rider smiled without humor. "Marshal Declan Rowe. These here are deputies Hatch, Langley, and Pryor." Behind him, the other 3 men sat their horses with the nervous stillness of men ready to shoot at any twitch. One chewed tobacco, the other adjusted his rifle grip twice in 10 seconds. Not seasoned professionals, hired iron, most likely. Too jumpy for marshals. Rowe dismounted in a slow, practiced motion, boots crunching on the hard-packed dirt. His spurs didn't jingle. They were too worn for that. Everything about him looked like it had seen one war too many. "We're tracking a man," Rowe said. "Took a bullet to the gut 3 days ago outside Silver Bluff. Killed a federal judge. Rode south. Blood trail says he came this way." Elias said nothing. His face didn't move, but the air between them tightened like leather stretching over flame. "A man with a bad wound wouldn't make it far without help," Rowe added. "You see anyone pass through?" The rancher glanced toward the hills, then back. "No visitors today. Been out in the paddock since sunup. Cattle don't feed themselves." Rowe stepped closer. His eyes were pale, too pale, snake's eyes, no blinking, no warmth, just calculation. You sure about that? Elias's mouth twitched. Not a smile, not quite. If I wasn't, I'd say so. Behind them, one of the deputies, Hatch maybe, spit brown juice into the dirt and leaned forward in his saddle. Funny thing, he said, tracks back yonder near your barn say different. Drag marks, blood too. Elias's jaw tightened. Not enough to notice unless you knew him well, but Rowe caught it. You always patch up strangers who bleed on your fence line, Mr. Cutter? Rowe asked, soft as molasses. I patch up horses, dogs, even a fox once back in spring. If I found someone bleeding, I'd send word to town. Rowe smiled again, but this time his hand drifted near the holster on his right hip. That's good, because if you're harboring Levi Brandt, you're harboring a fugitive, a man wanted for murder, treason, obstruction, and you'd be facing the same noose as him. The name hung in the air like smoke after a shot. Elias didn't react, just folded his arms. Never heard of him. Rowe's smile vanished. See, that's interesting, because Brandt used to wear a badge just like mine. Rode with the 6th Marshal Division out of Dry Creek. Then one day, he stops showing up. Weeks later, a judge ends up dead, and Levi's nowhere to be found. Folks say he went rogue, killed the judge after being dismissed. Others say he found something he wasn't supposed to. And what do you say? Elias asked. Rowe's jaw moved like he was chewing on glass. I say he's dangerous, and bleeding, and not far from here. A silence passed between them. The sun had dropped lower now, red light spilling across the porch like blood. A single horsefly buzzed near Rowe's ear. He didn't flinch. Mind if we look around? Rowe asked. I do. That a no? That's a man on his own land, with no warrant in your hand, saying this conversation's done. Rowe's face darkened, but only a little. He was the kind who preferred things polite, right up to the moment they weren't. You got nothing to hide, he said, voice colder now. You got nothing to fear. Elias took a step closer, just enough to make it plain he wouldn't back up. Last time someone said that to me, he said. They were dragging folks from their beds in Virginia and calling it justice. I know what fear looks like, Marshal, and I know what men like you do when nobody says no. Langley shifted on his horse, hand twitching near the trigger. Pryor was already scanning the house, likely wondering how many places a wounded man could be stuffed inside. Rowe spat into the dirt and turned. You watch yourself, Cutter, he said. Aiding a fugitive's a death sentence, even out here. Then I guess you'll need a gallows that can hold two. Rowe didn't reply. He swung back into his saddle, boots kicking dust. The 3 deputies followed suit, quiet now, but watching, especially Hatch, eyes lingering too long on the windows. They rode off at a slow trot, back toward the ridge. But Elias knew they weren't leaving, not for good. He didn't move until the sound of hooves had faded into the wind. Then he turned and went back inside. The room was darker now. Levi lay on the cot, his breath shallow, the bandage around his side soaked red again. His eyes were open. You heard, Elias said. Levi nodded once. Rowe won't stop, he rasped. He never does. Elias poured water from the tin pitcher into a cracked mug and handed it over. Levi's fingers trembled as he took it. You really kill that judge? Levi's eyes didn't waver. No, Elias nodded slowly. then glanced at the rifle leaning against the wall. Then we'd best figure out how to keep you breathing, because Marshal Rowe ain't gonna knock twice next time. Outside, night fell hard, and from somewhere in the hills, a wolf howled long and low. But it wasn't the only predator circling. The wind shifted near midnight. It came down from the high ridge dry and full of dust, whispering through the mesquite like something searching. The house creaked under it, boards settling, the porch groaning like an old man trying to rise. Inside, Elias Cutter sat at the kitchen table, boots planted on the warped floorboards, eyes fixed on the side room where the wounded man lay. He hadn't lit a lamp. Didn't need to. Moonlight slanted through the narrow windows, painting silver lines across the floor, the rifle across his knees, and the thoughts clawing through his head. Levi Brandt. The name stuck like grit in the teeth. Elias had heard it before. Years back. A marshal once, out of Dry Creek, if memory served. Word was, Brandt had been sharp, a straight-edge kind of lawman, the type who knew the difference between justice and obedience, and paid for it. But names alone didn't prove anything. Not out here. The cot creaked behind the wall. Then silence. Then slowly, Levi's voice came through, low and rough, like bark scraped against bark. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "You should. I'd be thinking it too." Elias didn't answer. He let the quiet carry his weight. "I wasn't born for running," Levi continued, "but I didn't have a choice, not after I found what they were doing." A long pause. Wind pressing harder now, scratching at the windows. Elias finally stood, rifle in hand, and pushed open the door to the side room. Levi lay propped on one elbow, the bandage at his ribs darker than before. Sweat slicked his skin, but his eyes were clear, alert, and heavy with something old, shame, maybe, or fury too long held. Elias leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Then tell it straight," he said. "Start with why a judge's throat got cut and your name ended up in the Telegraph." Levi's mouth twisted, not a smile, something closer to regret. It wasn't just a judge. It was Judge Alton Rourke. You know the name? Elias didn't move, but he knew the name. Everyone did. Rourke had ruled half the southern territories like a king in black robes, rode circuit court out of Santa Fe, hung men like it was Sunday tradition. Folks whispered he had more blood on his gavel than any outlaw had on his boots. "I knew he was dirty," Levi said. "Everyone did, but nobody wanted to touch him, not until I got wind of something worse." He shifted, jaw tight with pain. Elias stepped in, handed him water, and listened. "Smuggling routes," Levi said. "Guns, whiskey, girls. Didn't matter. If it turned coin, it moved. Through Rourke's territory, under his blessing. Paid off by traffickers and land barons, and someone in the marshal's division was helping it along." Elias felt something cold bloom in his gut. "You have proof?" Levi nodded slowly. "I was working a case up north. Me and a partner. We stumbled into a rail manifest that didn't match the logs. Names started piling up. Deputies, judges, even a couple territorial auditors. Then my partner turned up with his throat slit in a latrine stall. No trial, no answers. Just a warning scrawled in blood. Keep out. He took another breath. Short, ragged. So I kept digging. Quiet, careful. Stashed the evidence with a friend in Dry Creek, a woman named Anna Fields. Then I rode south to confront Rourke. Thought I could shake something loose, get him scared enough to talk. Elias stared at the wounded man, unmoving. But instead of answers, Levi continued, I got ambushed, shot in the back alley of the Red Coin Saloon before I even made it to the courthouse. His voice turned hard, and when I came to, Rourke was dead, throat cut, my badge gone, my horse missing, and Marshal Declan Rowe already spreading the story that Levi Brandt went rogue and butchered a federal judge. Elias didn't speak. He walked to the window instead, pushed back the curtain. The moon had climbed high, and the yard lay empty in white shadow. No riders yet, but they'd come. They set you up, he muttered. Levi nodded. Rowe's been the tip of the blade for years. He cleans up messes for men who pay in silence, and when someone doesn't fall in line, they disappear. That judge. He was a liability. Maybe he knew too much. Maybe he asked for too much. Either way, I was there, so they made me the story. Elias turned, face shadowed by the window light. How do I know you're not feeding me snake oil? Maybe you did kill the judge. Maybe all this is just a dying man trying to buy time. Levi's answer was slow, final. Because you used to wear a badge too, didn't you, Cutter? The words hit like a hammer. Elias said nothing. The room went still. Only the wind spoke, and even it seemed to hesitate at the edge of the door. You were with the 5th Division, Levi said. Back east, civil enforcement. You quit after that raid in White Hollow, didn't you? After they burned out a whole town just to catch one horse thief. Elias's fingers clenched. That was 15 years ago. He said quietly. Levi's eyes were sharp now, fevered but clear. I remember your file. They said you walked out of the marshal's office, left your badge on the desk, and never came back. Said you were soft. I wasn't soft, Elias said. I was finished watching good men get turned into hounds for the wrong master. Levi nodded. Then you know what this is. You know what Rowe's capable of. And you know that if I don't make it out of this canyon alive, that list I buried in Dry Creek dies with me. Elias stared at him, long and hard. The weight of memory settled on his shoulders like an old coat. Dusty, heavy, and full of bullet holes. You said there's a name on that list? More than one. Anyone local? Levi hesitated. Then, Sheriff Nolan, out of Haven Ridge, Banker Caldwell, and a preacher in Cedar Falls. All of them laundering blood money. All of them protected by men like Rowe. Elias turned back to the window. Outside, the first glint of lantern light crested the far hill. Riders. At least 4, maybe more. Coming slow, coming careful. They're back, Elias said. Probably didn't ride far to begin with. Levi shifted. I can stand if I have to. You won't, Elias said. You bleed any more, and I'll be digging your grave by morning. He reached for the rifle leaning beside the door, then paused. You really planning to clear your name? Levi looked him dead in the eye. No, I'm planning to burn theirs. Elias Cutter nodded once. And in that moment, without shaking hands or saying the words, the line between stranger and ally was crossed. The shovel struck wood just before sunrise. Elias Cutter paused, breath fogging in the chill, sweat trickling down the back of his neck despite the cold. He stood ankle-deep in a patch of earth near the old lean-to behind the barn, dirt piled beside him like fresh memory. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge, but light was creeping in, the kind of pale, uncertain light that made everything look like the ghost of itself. The place he was digging hadn't been touched in years, and he'd sworn it never would be again. But here he was, knees cracking, knuckles raw on the shovel handle, uncovering something he'd buried the same week he quit the badge. Not just a box, a piece of himself. He crouched, brushed the last layer of soil aside, and lifted the small iron-banded crate from its shallow grave. The wood had warped in the weather, but the lock held. He didn't bother with keys. A crowbar, a single twist, and the lid snapped free. Inside lay the things he hadn't wanted to remember. A rusted badge with a broken clasp, a child's boot, small and mud-caked, a folded photograph of a woman with her eyes turned just enough to seem like she knew what was coming. And beneath those, papers, letters, signed confessions, copies of old reports he wasn't supposed to keep. The kind of ink that could ruin men even after death. He didn't know why he kept them. Maybe he'd wanted insurance. Maybe guilt needed a weight to carry. Elias stared at them a long time, then reached in and pulled out the badge, wiped the dirt from its face. A six-pointed star, tarnished but unmistakable. The past had come calling again, and this time it wasn't leaving without blood. When he stepped back into the house, Levi was sitting up, barely. His face was pale, drawn tight around the mouth, but his eyes followed Elias like a man used to reading lies in the dark. "You went digging," Levi said, voice rasping. "Had to," Elias replied. He set the open box on the table and pulled out the folded photograph. "That's my wife. Her name was Grace." Levi looked down at it. "She's gone. Burned alive." Elias's voice was flat. Wrong house, wrong raid. They were looking for a bank robber in White Hollow. He'd already skipped town. They came anyway. My captain said we couldn't look weak. Levi swallowed hard. "They set fire to 6 homes," Elias continued. "Said it was for order, for the law. They didn't know my wife was inside. Or maybe they didn't care." He stared at the badge in his hand. "I quit the next day. Left the division. Rode till I hit dirt no one else wanted." "That why you helped me?" Levi asked. Elias gave a humorless smile. "I helped you because you looked like a man bleeding out in my yard. But now I'm helping you. Because if Roe's the same kind of bastard I used to ride with, then you ain't the only man who needs justice." Levi leaned forward, slow and pained. "Did you find anything useful?" Elias pulled a folded letter from the bottom of the box, held it out. "Judge Rourke," he said. "I was assigned to escort him once, years back. Found this stuffed in my saddlebag after the trip. He must have dropped it by mistake, or maybe not." Levi opened the letter with shaking hands. Read in silence. When he looked up, his face had changed. "This is it." He names Marshal Rowe directly. Mentions shipments moving through Cedar Falls, bribes to Nolan, and one line about a banker laundering silver through church funds. Levi looked stunned. "This proves everything." "No," Elias said. "It proves enough to get you killed twice over." They sat in silence a long while. Outside, the wind picked up again, soft but insistent, like breath under a closed door. "You ever wonder if men like us are just delaying the inevitable?" Elias asked. "Fighting fires in a field that was born to burn?" Levi looked toward the window, the coming dawn casting faint gold on his face. "Sometimes," he said, "but I figure there's 2 kinds of men in the world, the ones who let it burn, and the ones who grab a bucket in any way." Elias nodded once. "Then we better grab 2. They moved just after daybreak. Levi could barely stand, so Elias helped him onto a mule and led him down the north trail, away from the main road. The plan was to reach Haven Ridge by nightfall, ride quiet and light, slip past any watchers. But both men knew the odds were turning. As they passed the tree line, Elias paused. Something caught his eye. Tracks, fresh ones, deep from weight. 6 riders, maybe more, heading east, but circling back. Rowe's men had doubled back during the night. They weren't heading to town. They were hunting. "We don't have till nightfall," Elias said. Levi was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, but he reached under his coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. "The rest of the names are in here. Codes, dates. If I don't make it, you give this to Anna Fields in Dry Creek." "Anna Fields," Elias repeated. "You trust her? I'd die for her." Levi said quietly. "Almost did." Elias took the book, slid it inside his coat, then looked back toward the horizon. Clouds were forming, low, heavy. "I know a place," he said. "Old Miner's Trail cuts through the ravine west of Miller's Bluff. Tight walls, few ways in or out." "Trap," Levi said. "Yeah," Elias nodded, "but maybe not for us." They turned the mule west. Behind them, somewhere beyond the ridgeline, dust rose. Riders. Closing in. But Elias didn't look back. Some men run from their past. Some dig it up, and some load it into a rifle and wait for the bastards who never thought they'd be hunted. The sun was a pale smudge behind clouds when they reached the ravine. Elias Cutter led the mule with one hand, rifle slung across his back, boots crunching softly on the gravel trail. The canyon here was narrow and crooked, hemmed in by stone walls streaked with rust and shale. Even the wind moved quieter, pressed flat by the towering cliffs above. Levi Brandt slumped in the saddle, every breath rattling through clenched teeth. The bandage at his side had gone dark again, blood soaking through despite Elias's best efforts. But the man held upright, barely, his revolver resting on his thigh, his eyes sharp beneath the fever. "You sure about this place?" Levi asked, voice dry as bone. Elias scanned the path ahead. "Only 2 ways in, only one worth taking, and they'll be riding fast, confident. That's the dangerous kind." Elias nodded. "The kind that forgets men like us have nothing left to lose." They reached the bend, just past the natural choke point, where the trail narrowed between 2 walls barely wide enough for a single horse. Elias had passed through here once, years ago, chasing a cattle thief who never came back out. Now it was the best chance they had. He helped Levi down. The man nearly collapsed, knees buckling until Elias caught him under the arm. "Easy now," Elias muttered. "We just need to hold till dark." Levi coughed once, a red smear on his sleeve. "They won't wait that long." "No," Elias agreed. "They won't." By mid-morning, the trap was nearly set. Elias had rigged the old dynamite stash he'd kept buried beneath his fence line for years. 4 sticks, wired to a trigger under a slab of shale just before the turn. Enough to bring down half the wall if the rocks cooperated. He'd laid a second trap farther up, a wire snare tied to a buried stake, rigged high between 2 jutting boulders. It wouldn't kill a man, but it'd take him off his horse hard enough to break bones. And just beyond that, nestled in a depression of broken stone, Elias laid his final defense. The Springfield, a scoped rifle, still oiled, still clean. He hadn't touched it since the war. Now it felt like it belonged in his hands. As he loaded each round, He thought of Grace, not her face. Not anymore. That had faded years ago. But the sound of her voice when she laughed, and the way she used to say his name, not like a curse or a prayer, but something real. He sat behind the rocks, waited, watched the road, and thought about how a man's sins always found him again, no matter how deep he buried them. It was near noon when the riders came. Dust kicked up first, then shapes, then men. 7 of them. Marshal Declan Rowe rode at the front, hat low, badge gleaming. He didn't slow at the canyon mouth, didn't scout, just motioned with 2 fingers and kept riding, like he already owned whatever was ahead. Behind him rode Langley and Pryor, followed by 4 new men, hard-eyed types, saddle-worn and twitchy, the kind who didn't ask questions before drawing iron. Elias sighted the scope, watched, waited. Rowe reached the slab. The explosion wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Just enough force to bring half the cliff down in a thunderous roar, dust choking the pass, horses screaming as rock rained down. The canyon echoed with panic. 2 riders were buried outright. 1 horse snapped its leg trying to flee, screaming until the sound cut short. Langley managed to turn back, coughing and shouting. Pryor stumbled clear, covered in ash, blood running down his cheek. Rowe was still on his horse, barely, his eyes wide behind the dust. Elias chambered a round, fired. The bullet punched through Pryor's shoulder, spinning him into the dirt. Rowe ducked, scrambled off the saddle, vanished behind a downed log near the cliff base. Return fire cracked out, wild, echoing, panicked. Bullets screamed overhead, pinging off the rocks near Elias's position. He crouched lower, breath steady, chambered another round. That was warning 1. He whispered. Levi groaned beside him, propped against a stone with his revolver limp in his lap. You always this subtle? He muttered. Elias smiled grimly. Ask me after we live through it. From below came Rowe's voice, loud and angry. Brant, Cutter, you think you can hole up in there forever? This canyon's a coffin. You just pick the dirt it'll bury you in. Elias stood long enough to shout back. I picked it 'cause it fits men like you better. Another shot rang out, close, chipped the stone near his face. He ducked. They'll circle wide, Levi said. 2 riders at least. Try the side ridge. You saw that dip to the east? I saw it, Elias said, and I rigged it. What if they make it through anyway? Elias looked at him. Then you give me that list, and you run. I can't run, Elias. You crawl. You drag yourself. You finish this. Levi stared back, jaw tight, then reached into his coat and handed over the small book. Elias tucked it into his vest. They get that, and all this was for nothing. From the ridge to the east, a new sound rose. Hooves, careful, then gunfire, 1 shot. Then silence. Elias peeked over the rocks. One of the newcomers, broad-shouldered, blond, lay face down, blood staining the stones under his chest. The second was caught in the snare, dangling by 1 leg, screaming as he flailed with his pistol. Elias silenced him with a single shot. The canyon went still. Down below, Rowe had stopped shouting, but Elias knew what came next. The quiet before the last push, and sure enough, minutes later, Rowe's voice came again. You want truth, Cutter? You really want it? Elias didn't answer. You think Brant's clean? You think he stumbled into all this like a wide-eyed pup? A pause. Ask him what happened to Sheriff Kane. Ask him about the girl outside Silver Bluff. Ask him what it cost to keep her quiet. Levi's face went pale. Elias turned. What's he talking about? Levi didn't meet his eyes. I did what I had to, he said, to keep digging, to get inside the circle. Cain was dirty. The girl, she knew what would happen if she talked. I paid her to disappear. That's all? You used her. Levi said nothing. Elias stared at him. The wind picked up again, dry and cold. Then he looked toward the canyon's edge. Rowe was stepping into view, rifle in one hand, hat gone, blood on his jaw. No more tricks, Cutter, he called. You've got one chance to walk away from this. Hand him over. Step aside. Elias raised the scope. Ain't stepping aside for men like you anymore. He fired. The shot caught Rowe in the leg, dropping him behind a rock with a roar of pain. More gunfire followed, scattered and erratic. But Elias wasn't aiming anymore. He'd seen what he needed to see. The trap had worked. But now came the choice. Levi groaned beside him. We can still get out. If we move west, through the ridge trail. Elias interrupted. I'm not leaving yet. Why not? Because I need to know if I'm protecting a man worth saving, or just helping another devil dig deeper. The first shot of the final hour came without warning. It cracked through the canyon like a whip, biting into the stone just inches from Elias Cutter's head. He ducked low, dust spraying his face, and returned fire fast. 2 shots, measured and sharp, meant more to keep heads down than kill. Below, Marshal Rowe was moving, limping behind a fallen log, blood still soaking the thigh of his trousers where Elias had clipped him. But pain hadn't slowed him. If anything, it had made him more dangerous. From the north ridge, 2 of Rowe's men crept forward along the rocks. One slipped down the gully, boots silent, rifle ready. The other covered him, eyes scanning, body hunched low in the pale light. They moved like men who knew how to kill. Elias whispered, "Here they come." Levi Brandt shifted against the rock behind him. He was pale, sweat slicking his skin, the revolver in his hand trembling slightly. The blood from his wound had soaked through the fresh wrap Elias had tied an hour earlier. "You still with me?" Elias asked. "Not all of me," Levi said through clenched teeth, "but the part that hates them's still sharp." Elias nodded. He leaned out, fired toward the ridge. The shot caught the first man low in the belly. A scream cut short. The second flinched, ducked, then raised his rifle to fire. But Levi beat him to it. His revolver barked once, the bullet striking true. The man toppled backwards off the rocks, arms flailing, and then the canyon went silent again, except for the wind and Rowe's voice. "Good shooting, boys," he called, voice echoing off the stone. "Real noble. You 2 ever ask yourselves why you're dying in a ditch with a traitor and a coward?" Elias loaded another round. "Sounds like a man trying to talk his way out of a bullet," he muttered. But Levi's face was rigid. "I know what he's doing," he said. "He's not talking to you." "He's talking to me." Another pause. Then Rowe called again. "You think you're a martyr, Levi? Some saint chasing justice? Tell Cutter what really happened to Anna Fields. Go on. Tell him what you did to the only woman who trusted you." Elias turned to Levi slowly. The wounded man's hand tightened around the revolver. "Anna?" Elias asked. "That's the name you gave me, the one who has the list." Levi didn't answer right away. He was staring past Elias, through the canyon dust, like trying to see something he'd buried long ago. Then his voice came out hollow. "She's dead." Elias didn't move, didn't blink. "How?" "Because I got too close. Levi said, because I made her part of this. She kept the ledger, the evidence, and I didn't protect her fast enough. You said she had the list. She did, until Roe found her. Elias's chest felt tight. You lied. I needed your help. Levi snapped. You wouldn't have lifted that rifle if you thought this ended in a grave. The silence that followed was cold. She was the only good part of this, Levi said, softer now, and I let them kill her. Roe made sure I knew what it cost. Below, the marshal's voice rose again. You hear that, Cutter? That's who you're bleeding for. A man who got the one good woman in his life murdered because he couldn't stop chasing ghosts. Elias stood slowly. You done? He shouted back. No, Roe called. You got one more bullet to fire before this ends. Just don't aim it at me. Elias turned to Levi, eyes hard. Why me? He asked. Why come to my land? Why drag me into this? Levi looked up, blood in his teeth. Because they fear you. Still, even after all these years. You were the one marshal that walked away. That stayed walked away. Not many men do that. That's not an answer. You're the only man they can't buy, and the only man who still knows how to shoot straight. Elias stared at him, then down at the badge he'd kept buried for 15 years. It sat in his coat pocket now, heavier than any bullet. You're not clean, Brant. No, but I'm not Roe. A distant crack of boots against stone pulled Elias's gaze forward again. Marshal Roe was moving, gun in hand. Blood down his leg. A wild gleam in his eyes now. He was limping straight into the canyon, no cover, no flanking, just pure fury. You think you're a judge now, Cutter? Roe shouted. You think you get to decide who's worth saving? You're just a man who quit. You buried your badge like it was your sins. But it didn't work, did it? They're still crawling out of the dirt. Elias raised the rifle. Yeah, he murmured. But this time, they're not walking away. He pulled the trigger. The bullet hit Roe high in the chest, just below the collarbone. It spun him, knocked him hard against the canyon wall. He slid down in a cloud of dust, coughing once, blood spraying across the rock. And then he was still. Elias lowered the rifle. No sound but the wind. Behind him, Levi let out a long breath, and then collapsed. Elias turned. The man was unconscious, pale as bone, breathing ragged. He crossed to him, dropped to his knees. Hold on, he muttered. Don't make me carry all this truth by myself. Levi didn't answer, but his chest still moved. A shadow moved across the canyon mouth. Elias looked up fast. It was one of the last deputies, Langley, rifle in hand, eyes wide with panic, face ghost pale. He stared at Roe's body, then at Elias. Then he dropped the gun. Jesus, Langley said. He said we were hunting a traitor. You were, Elias replied. Only it wasn't the man you thought. Langley nodded slowly, then turned and ran. Elias let him go. He sat in the dust beside Levi Brant as the wind stirred the ash and blood. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried. The canyon was quiet again, except for the truth still echoing through it. Not all of it good, not all of it clean, but finally, out loud. The sun rose slow the next morning. It crawled over the canyon's edge with that heavy stillness only the desert knew, light spilling across the blood-dark rocks, catching on rifle barrels and broken stones. The wind had stilled, and all that remained was the weight of what had happened. and the man who still stood. Elias Cutter sat on the canyon floor beside the dying fire. Levi Brandt lay wrapped in Elias's coat, chest rising shallow and slow, a fresh bandage wrapped tight around his ribs, white linen spotted deep red. The shootout had ended hours ago. Rose's body lay cold against the wall where it had fallen. The others were gone, buried beneath rock, fled, or left bleeding in the trail behind. Langley hadn't returned. Elias figured he wouldn't. Some men ran because they were afraid. Others ran because they finally saw the truth and couldn't live with the part they'd played. Elias understood both. The fire popped softly. A lizard crept out from between two stones, pausing to taste the air. Far overhead, the hawk circled again. Levi stirred. His eyes fluttered open, squinting against the light. "You didn't leave," he whispered, voice cracked raw. "No," Elias said. "Not yet. You should have thought about it." Levi tried to sit, failed. Elias pushed him back gently. "You need to rest. I need to finish what I started. You already did. Rose dead. The others, whatever's left, are scattered. That book of yours, it's got names, enough to burn a whole territory clean. I'll get it where it needs to go." Levi stared at him. "You trust me now?" Elias hesitated. "I trust that you bled for the right thing, even if you didn't always live for it." Levi let out a breath, half a laugh, half a cough. "That's more than I deserve." Elias stood, stretched his stiff back, and scanned the canyon one last time. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, just full, like the land had exhaled. "You were right," Elias said quietly. "They feared you, feared the truth more. Truth doesn't matter if no one listens. They'll listen now." Elias reached into his coat and pulled out the small ledger, worn, leather-bound, pages edged with blood and dust. He flipped through it slowly. Names, figures, routes, corruption so deep it had become ordinary. One entry made him pause. Sheriff Nolan, transfer, 3,000 in coin. Sunday collection. Next to it, a single line in different handwriting. "A church is no place to launder sin." Elias closed the book. "You wrote that?" Levi nodded. "Didn't help. It might now." He tucked it away, turned back toward the mule, saddled and ready near the ravine entrance. The world waited out there, unchanged and unmoved. But Elias knew better. Some things had changed. Levi's voice came again, quieter now. "What will you do, Cutter?" Elias didn't answer at first. He looked toward the horizon, where the light stretched long and gold across the hills, where the road to Dry Creek twisted through silence and danger alike. "Deliver the truth," he said, "then ride west." "Back to hiding?" "No," Elias said. "Back to living." He paused, looked back at the man still lying in the dust. "And you?" Levi's smile was faint, broken. "If I make it, I go to the Capitol, testify, burn what's left of this rotten structure to the ground. And if you don't make it?" Levi turned his head, blinking against the light. "Then you take that ledger and don't let the bastards lie over my grave." Elias gave a slow nod. "I can promise that." He helped Levi to his feet, slow and steady, the man groaning with each movement. But he stood, just barely. Together they reached the mule. Elias strapped the ledger tight in the saddlebag. "You'll ride front," he said. "I'll lead. You fall off. I'll drag you the rest of the way." Levi chuckled. "Fair deal." They set off slowly. canyon walls rising behind them like the last lines of a long-forgotten song. The path ahead was dusty, winding, full of dangers yet unmet. But Elias didn't fear it. Not anymore. Not after what had been buried and dug up again. Not after what had bled here. They crested the final ridge before the high plain. The wind picked up, gentle now, stirring Elias's coat, brushing dust from Levi's shoulder like some old spirit passing through. Below them the world stretched wide and quiet, a sky that hadn't burned, a land that had chosen not to swallow them whole. Elias Cutter stared out at it, the sun warm on his weathered face. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was carrying a grave on his back, just a promise. And sometimes that was enough. They made it to Dry Creek 3 days later. Levi Brandt collapsed outside the magistrate's office and was taken in under armed watch. Half dead, half saint, he spoke every name in that ledger to anyone willing to listen. His words, recorded, repeated, reprinted, turned the tide. Marshal offices closed. Judges resigned. A handful of men swung. More ran. Not all of it was justice, but it was a start. Elias Cutter left town before the trials began. No badge, no thank you, no need. He didn't ride east or home or back to where things had gone wrong. He rode west, toward silence that didn't carry shame, toward sunsets that didn't demand answers, toward a life not built on forgetting, but on surviving better. He never saw Levi again, but word came months later that the man lived, crippled, coughing, but alive. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the truth doesn't heal. It just scars cleaner. And sometimes mercy looks like a bullet fired second.